I have a confession to make. And Doug, or Mr. Covison, has given me dinner already, so I can make this confession. My book is not about Casper Collins. My book is No Greater Calling. Dr. John Monet wrote on it very early, and he actually gave me permission to use this quote on the back cover. With admirable emphasis in recent decades on narrating the roles and deeds of American Indian warriors in the nation's story of conquest, the American soldier of the Frontier Army has all but been forgotten or portrayed in pejorative context. I had to look up pejorative, but I did learn what it means. Eric Johnson has brought their names and the story back to life as the men they were, doing their often undesirable, often controversial duty. A story of individual veterans who deserve the dignity of being remembered. The statistics Johnson brings to the fore. This excellent book will serve as a needed resource for writers and historians for years to come. Very cool. Not quite John Ford, John Wayne cool, but very cool nonetheless. So while Casper Collins plays a part in No Greater Calling, a very important part, No Greater Calling is not about Casper Collins. I wrote No Greater Calling as a veteran. We'll ask some of you to stand one more time. It's the final time, I promise. How many are veterans? Can you stand, please? Thank you so much for everyone who served. And as a veteran, I often say I was in the last American peacetime military, having gotten out in end of 1990. As a veteran, I have a firm belief that all of the men and now women that answer their nation's greatest calling are deserving of being honored and deserving of having their names remembered. That's simple dignity. And that's why I wrote No Greater Calling, not to tell the story of Casper Collins. I mean, my book's 400 pages long, 410 pages. I could have told the story of Casper Collins in a fraction of that. It was to recognize the names of the frontier soldiers by recording the names. So in that way, No Greater Calling, what I've done is about Casper Collins, but it's about more. It's about Lieutenant Napoleon H. Daniels. Lieutenant Daniels was killed in action at Crazy Woman's Crossing to the north of here. A year later, July 21st, 1866, a year after the death of young Casper Collins. Has anyone ever heard of Lieutenant Daniels? Lieutenant Daniels' remains were taken to Fort Reno. I told somebody here I was going to mention Fort Reno in the presentation, so I fulfilled my promise now. His remains were taken to Fort Reno, where he was buried with Masonic honors. The story of his burial shows up in the letter of another officer of the post. And when the Army abandoned Fort Reno, as well as the other Powder River forts, they abandoned the remains of the soldiers behind as well. Eventually, the remains of Lieutenant Daniels, as well as the others buried at the Fort Reno Cemetery, were relocated to Custer National now, where he lies as an unknown. Lieutenant Daniels' final resting place is known but to men, but to God. Or No Greater Callings for Captain William Judd Fetterman. I'm sure many of you heard of Fetterman. Killed in action December 21st, 1866. Some of you may not know, Fetterman was a member of the 18th U.S. Infantry. 18th U.S. Infantry trained in Columbus, Ohio, my hometown. Camp Thomas in Columbus, Ohio. Now, once upon a time, it was a horse farm. Now it's a major suburban area, just north of the Ohio State University campus. Camp Thomas is long ago gone. There's a giant grocery store and lots of little stores in that area now. There's no marker for Camp Thomas. I've tried to remedy that, and maybe next time I come, I'll be able to tell you I did get a marker installed. The William Judd Fetterman was buried at Fort Phil Kearny. His remains were abandoned when the fort was abandoned. And eventually he too was buried at Custer National, far from home. Or maybe no greater callings about Lieutenant John Augustine McKinney. Who's heard of McKinney? McKinney was killed in action November 25th, 1876, in Ranald Mackenzie's attack on a Cheyenne village in the aftermath of the Custer disaster. It said Mackenzie, a very stoic professional soldier, wept at the word of the death of his young lieutenant. McKinney's remains were shipped home to Tennessee, where he is buried in a family plot. His name only appears as a part of a family marker, and they get the date of his death wrong. I've contacted a family member, corresponded with them a while to get that changed. I actually offered to collect funds to have it changed. Felt out of touch. Perhaps the marker has been changed. But in this way, not only is Greater calling about Casper Collins and all those men and the 1,100 soldiers who were killed in action. In that way, Casper Collins, or No Greater Calling, is about the simple message that if you give your lives in service to the nation, you deserve to be honored, deserve to be remembered. Many of those same soldiers that fought Indians in the West, just a few years later, served against Spanish in Cuba and insurrectionists in the Philippines. 385 were killed in action in Cuba. A marker stands to those men on the Columbus, Ohio State House. And my next book, I'm very precursory, building a foundation for it, will be the same type of study on the Spanish-American War. Spanish-American War is very interesting to me because despite my best efforts, I was unable to identify a single officer, or excuse me, a single family member that had any involvement whatsoever in the Indian Wars. My great-great-grandfather served in an Ohio volunteer regiment during the Spanish-American War. He got as close to Cuba as Tampa, Florida, and you notice the Spanish never invaded Tampa, so he did his job well. So. And our nation and our nation's history is filled with war. For all of our greatness, much of our time and resources have been spent involved in war. So maybe No Greater Callings about the men that fought and died in the First World War under Pershing. 53,400 American soldiers were killed in action. That monument is to the men from Washington, D.C. who fought and died in the battlefields of France during the First World War. There is no national monument to the men of the American soldiers who fought and died in the First World War. That is about to change. They've begun very precursory fundraising opportunities to build a monument. And I will say the fact that this monument has to be funded with private funds is unconscionable. Same as the Second World War. With all the things our government spends money on, they can find $100 million or $1 billion or however many dollars to build this monument. But I'll get off my soapbox again. Or the World War II monument. How many of you have been there? Say I have not yet. I've not. I have relatives that fought and served in the Second World War. I had a great uncle who served at Okinawa in the United States Marine Corps. He was a major. My grandmother, who passed away before I was born, I never had the opportunity to meet her. I understand she was a remarkable woman. Family legend is that she was the first Marine from Knox County, Ohio, and the female Marines. 229,560 killed in action. Or maybe No Greater Callings, decade to the men of the Korean War. 33,800 killed in action. Or the men of the Vietnam War. 58,300 killed in action. When I knew of my trip to Casper, I began going by your local newspaper about a weekly basis, just to get a lay of the land, so to speak. And a truly wonderful story I read was where Casper had a parade for those men who fought and served in Vietnam. 40 years late, but regardless, it's a wonderful story. Mr. Kubasen, thank you for any part you played in that role and your Veterans Museum. And now again, the United States finds ourselves embroiled in another war, the war on terror. Nearly 5,100 killed in action. The number is sure to increase. When I told you earlier that the picture of the home of Casper Collins, the Collins family home, is one of two good pictures I've taken my entire life. This is the other one. When I was working on Nobury Calling, I made 4 trips to the National Archives. Each time I would go to DC and Arlington National Cemetery. I would walk the grounds of Arlington. You would see the standard tourist type places you'd visit, the Tomb of the Unknown, the Eternal Flame. But eventually I would just walk the cemetery hoping to find some guidance in what I was trying to do. And this picture was taken at the back of the cemetery. The cemetery is huge, but it was taken at the back of the cemetery. And this tree standing silent watch over the graves of fallen heroes. I have that picture in black and white too. Somehow maybe black and white makes my photography seem a little more adequate. Now, that is my presentation. I hope you learned a little bit about Casper Collins, the way it stands forgotten largely in his home community. But I have a challenge as I do finish this presentation. My first challenge is to our leaders in Washington, D.C. and the command of the United States Army. You have a remarkable responsibility. My children are of an age, my children are 20 and 21. They're of an age that they could potentially be called to service or could choose to serve. Of course, we have no draft now. So as you decide to send our young men and our young women in harm's way, make sure you've weighed the consequences of your decisions and considered all the other possibilities. The other challenge I have to the men of the Army and our leadership, we as a nation will fly halfway around the world to visit the site of a downed bomber in Southeast Asia, to recover bone fragments, remains of crewmen, and make no mistake about it, we should be doing that. But I would challenge the men of the Army, the men of the government, to visit the sites of the former frontier post, find the post cemetery, do a study, make sure remains haven't been left behind. As recently as a decade ago, there were remains found at Fort Casper. So identify the remains. If you can do a DNA test, find their family, make those efforts. The men deserve that much. And to all of you, many of you are from Casper, support this wonderful organization. Support the museum, support the veterans staff, Veterans Museum, support it with both your time and your money. Volunteer. Go out to local cemetery on Veterans Day or Memorial Day. Help post flags by the graves of veterans. Or something as simple as you're in your local grocery store. What is the local grocery store here? Is it Walmart? I don't know. You're in your local grocery store and you pass an elderly man struggling with his cart to buy his few groceries with his meager Social Security. He wears a ball cap, identifying himself as a World War II veteran or a Vietnam War veteran. If you were 18 on Battleship Road when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, you're 92 years old now. If you were an 18-year-old Marine in Southeast Asia in 1968 during the Tet Offensive. You're 65 now. I'm 47. Sometime over the next decade or so, the second story on the news will be that the last veteran of Normandy, or last veteran of Pearl Harbor, passed away. And within my lifetime, the last veteran of the Tet Offensive has passed away. So you pass those elderly men or those elderly women, thank them for their service. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Your generation saved the world. That is no exaggeration. So again, No Great Calling is about Casper Collins. It's about the men I mentioned. It's about so much more. It's about we as a nation need to honor our veterans. We need to do all we can to ensure men who are coming home and women who are coming home broken from war receive the treatment they deserve. We need to make sure that no man who has worn the khaki or the olive green in service to his country is sleeping on a bridge. We need to make sure a veteran who spent 20 years in service to his country or 30 years in service to his country is not struggling to get his medications or pay for his groceries. Thank you for your time.